Hey little dreamers! Ready for a magical bedtime adventure? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a sleepy tale. Let's go! The rain was falling softly over the sleepy village of Mallowtree. You could hear it tapping gently against the rooftops, whispering over the cobbled lanes, and splashing into the puddles that bloomed like silver coins along the winding road. And there, just at the edge of the baker's shop, was a girl in a too big blue raincoat and very yellow, very muddy boots. Her name was Elira. Each morning, she delivered small bundles of wildflowers to the villagers. Lilies for Miss Grumble who never smiled, sunflowers for the clockmaker who always did, and forget-me-nots for the baker who forgot most things except bread. Today, though, the flowers were wilting from the downpour, and her basket was growing heavy. Still, Elira didn't mind. She splashed cheerfully through the puddles, humming a tune only she knew, with raindrops threading into her braid like tiny pearls. She didn't have much, but she had kindness in her steps and wonder in her eyes. As she passed the big oak tree near the crossroads, the one that always looked like it had something to say, something fluttered. Not a leaf, not a bird, but paper. A slip of damp, gold-edged parchment caught between two branches. Curious, Elira tilted her head, wiped her sleeve across her brow, and stepped closer. Raindrops pattered on her shoulders as she reached into the hollow. It wasn't just any old paper. It shimmered faintly, even in the gray light, wrapped and sealed in what looked like real wax. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. Letter. Royal seal. An invitation. To the palace. To the royal ball. Tonight. Elira stared at the letter as rainwater streaked down her cheeks. For a long moment, she wondered if it was a mistake, if someone had lost it, or if perhaps the tree had simply decided she needed an adventure. The seal was real, though. A pressed emblem in deep red wax. The royal crest of House Avonlea. She had seen it once on a bag of flour at the market, and had memorized the swirling lines like a secret. Carefully, she peeled the damp parchment open. The ink shimmered gold, curling across the page in elegant script. You are cordially invited to the royal ball at Evermist Palace. One night only. Tonight. All are welcome who believe in wonder. Elira blinked. All are welcome. She read it again just to be sure. Her thumb traced the edge of the page, soft and soggy but glowing all the same. She looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and say it was a joke. But no one came. Only the old oak, looking entirely pleased with itself, and the ever-persistent drizzle. Her heart thudded in her chest, not with fear, but with a strange kind of joy, like something long lost had just been found. An invitation to the palace. To a real ball. She had never even seen the palace gates up close, let alone stepped inside. But then reality crept in, dripping like the rain down her coat sleeves. She didn't own a gown, or slippers, or even gloves. Her boots were caked with mud, her raincoat 2 sizes too big, and her braid had frizzed into a crown of chaos. She looked nothing like the people who belonged at royal balls. And yet, the letter said, all are welcome who believe in wonder. She looked at her muddy boots. Maybe, just maybe. Elira stood there beneath the dripping branches, the letter in one hand and her basket of drooping flowers in the other. The invitation pulsed softly with that golden shimmer, as if urging her to hurry. She tucked it gently into the inner pocket of her raincoat, where it warmed against her chest. Her heart felt strange, like a bird that had just remembered how to fly. She turned and began to walk quickly, her boots sloshing through puddles as if they had somewhere very important to be. 'Cause now they did. The royal ball was tonight. She didn't bother finishing her deliveries. She left the basket safely under the baker's awning and whispered to the flowers, sorry little ones, I have something wild to do. Then she ran. Through alleys, past chimneys coughing out smoke, and past the clockmaker's shop where the hour bell rang 3 times. Just 3 hours until sunset. By the time she reached her cottage, she was panting and dripping, her braid half undone. She stood in front of the cracked mirror by her bed and frowned. Her dress, if you could even call it that, was just a patchy old cotton shift with a stitched-on pocket and a few bluebell stains. She didn't own ribbons or lace, only a scarf her mother once made that now held a stubborn tear. Her cheeks were pink from running, and a smudge of mud marked her chin like a dimple. She looked like a child who had wandered away from her chores, not like someone meant to dance with princes under chandeliers. But the invitation hadn't asked for perfection, it had asked for belief. She wiped her face on a towel, shook out her dress, and tugged on her yellow rain boots. If she was going to the palace, she'd go as herself. Elira didn't have a carriage, or even a pony, but she had 2 legs, her yellow boots, and just enough stubbornness to make the journey. Outside, the rain had softened to a misty drizzle, the kind that makes the world smell like damp moss and dandelions. She pulled her hood up, tightened the frayed drawstrings, and began walking toward the road that curved past the orchards and into the woods beyond. She had never been to Evermist Palace, but everyone in Mallowtree knew it sat beyond the forest ridge, where the clouds gathered low and the river gleamed like a ribbon of silver. On clear days, its highest tower peeked through the mist like a crown rising from the trees. Today, though, there was no clear view, only fog and puddles and the occasional squawk of geese who had claimed the road as their own. Elira trudged on. Her boots splashed and squelched, sometimes slipping on the slick path. But she didn't stop. She only laughed when a gust of wind flipped her hood inside out or when a goose gave her the side-eye as she passed. She walked through briars that tugged at her hem, over fallen logs slippery with moss, and through ditches filled with rainwater that sucked at her boots like playful little trolls. Her socks were soaked, her hair completely wild now. And yet, something inside her glowed brighter with every step. She was muddy. She was late. She was soaked through. But she was going to a ball. And not even the grumpiest goose or the puddliest puddle was going to stop her. She glanced up through the mist as the forest began to thin, and just ahead, far off and glimmering, she saw it. Palace, rising like a dream at the edge of the clouds. The palace shimmered like a mirage in the distance, all golden spires and soft candlelight flickering through arched windows. It seemed to float above the mist, impossibly elegant, impossibly far from the world Elira knew. Her breath caught as she stood at the forest's edge. The wide gravel path leading to the gates was slick with rain, puddles pooling in silver moons along the way. The road curled upward like a spine toward the grand entrance, and Elira, soaked, muddy, and dressed like a stormy day itself, took her first step onto it. Her boots squelched dramatically, and she winced at the sound. "Shoo!" she whispered to them. They squelched back rebelliously. She sighed and kept walking. With each step, the palace grew larger. Towers wrapped in ivy, lanterns glowing soft pink and gold. Music drifted faintly through the drizzle, flutes and violins and something that sounded suspiciously like giggling. Laughter at a ball. Elira had always imagined it would be silent and stiff, but this sounded like floating. Rain dripped off her hood and down her cheeks. Her boots were soaked through, her dress clung to her knees, and her braid was now a frizzed halo. But something about the palace ahead made her forget all that. It pulled her forward, as if it recognized her. She passed marble statues slick with rain, flower beds blooming wild even in the mist, and fountains that burbled merrily despite the weather. A hedgehog with a party hat scurried across the path and disappeared into a hedge. Elira blinked. Did I just see? But then she reached the final steps leading to the great silver gates, and all thoughts of hedgehogs vanished. Because standing there, arms crossed and helmet crooked, was a palace guard, and he did not look impressed. The palace guard was tall and broad-shouldered, with a rust-red uniform soaked from the drizzle and a dented silver helmet tucked under one arm. His boots were polished, unlike Elira's, which squelched ominously as she stopped in front of him. A single eyebrow arched as he looked her up and down, from her muddy boots to her soggy braid to the wild look of purpose in her eyes. Elira cleared her throat. "I have an invitation," she said, trying to sound confident, though her voice came out half whisper, half wobble. The guard didn't speak at first. He just stared. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the parchment, still damp but glowing faintly, as if excited to be presented. She held it up with both hands like an offering. He took it, flipped it over, examined the seal, then looked back at her with a crooked smile. "This says all are welcome who believe in wonder," he read aloud, his voice deep and amused. Elira nodded quickly. "I believe in wonder," she said. He looked at her muddy boots. "And do those believe in manners?" She blinked, unsure if he was joking. But then he chuckled, a low, unexpected sound, and stepped aside. "Well then," he said, swinging open the gate with a grand bow, "let's not keep the chandeliers waiting." Elira hesitated. Just like that," he said. "You've got magic on your boots and stars in your eyes. Seems more royal than most who've walked through here." With a grateful smile, she stepped through the gates. Behind her, the guard muttered, "Can't wait to see what she does to that ballroom." And as the great doors creaked open ahead, she swallowed her nerves and walked toward a night unlike any other. The palace doors loomed ahead, two towering panels of silver and pearl, etched with scenes of ancient festivals, royal banquets, and skies filled with birds and stars. As Elira stepped closer, they opened without a sound, parting like curtains before a grand performance. Warmth rushed out to meet her. Candlelight flickered from golden sconces. The scent of lilacs and baked pears drifted through the marble corridor. And there, at the far end, was the entrance to the ballroom. Glowed, truly glowed, with light and music and the swish of silk and laughter bouncing off high arched ceilings. Elira could barely take it in. She pressed a hand to her chest, where the invitation still pulsed softly under her coat, as if to say, "You belong." Her boots squelched on the marble. That was less elegant. As she took her first steps into the ballroom, the laughter quieted. Heads turned. Fans paused mid-flutter. Someone gasped, very dramatically, and someone else dropped a canopy. Her rain boots gave a loud squeak. She froze, just for a breath. Every pair of eyes seemed to look her way. A noblewoman in a gown that looked like a cake towered near the refreshment table. She raised a monocle. "Oh my heavens," she whispered loudly. "Is that mud?" Elira smiled sheepishly, water dripping from her hem. She gave a tiny, soggy curtsy. The silence thickened. And then, asterisk squeak, squeak, squelch asterisk, she crossed the ballroom floor. Let them stare. Let them laugh. She was here. And wonder had walked in with her. Far above, a chandelier twinkled approvingly. And somewhere near the orchestra, a prince who had been thoroughly bored for the last hour finally looked up. Prince Kalen sat slumped in his velvet chair at the edge of the ballroom, chin in hand, eyes glazed over as yet another pair of sparkling guests swept past. He had danced with duchesses, bowed to baronesses, and listened to an earl's son recite 3 different kinds of grape. He was very nearly asleep, dreaming with his eyes open, until he heard it. Squish, squeak, squish. He lifted his head. Across the polished ballroom floor walked a girl in a too big raincoat and shockingly yellow boots, trailing muddy water with every step. Her hair was a cloud of wind-tangled braid, her cheeks pink from the cold. She didn't look royal. She didn't look graceful. But she did look awake. Kalen sat up straighter. The girl reached the middle of the ballroom and stopped. Her boots left perfect little puddles. Her coat dripped. Her eyes scanned the crowd and then locked with his. She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. If anything, she tilted her head slightly, as if to say, asterisk what? Never seen a girl in boots before. Asterisk. He felt something fizz in his chest. Something like delight. All around her, guests began whispering behind lace fans. There were gasps, raised brows, and quiet disapproval. The queen hadn't said a word yet, but even she was watching, fan motionless before her lips. Kaelin stood. Slowly. His velvet chair creaked. Elira's brows rose just a little as the prince, the actual prince began walking straight toward her. The crowd shifted. Someone dropped a fork. He stopped before her. They were the same height, almost. She smelled like earth and rain and lilacs. "May I have this dance?" he asked, voice warm. Elira blinked, then looked down at her boots, then up again, and she said very clearly, "You sure about that?" Prince Kaelin chuckled, a real, honest chuckle that turned a few powdered wigs in surprise. "Absolutely sure," he said. "I've had enough of polite twirling. I'd rather dance with someone real." Elira gave him a look, half amusement, half disbelief, but extended her hand anyway. "Okay," she said, "but don't say I didn't warn you." They walked together to the center of the ballroom, where the musicians paused in uncertainty. All eyes were still on her, on the muddy boots, the puddles, the way she left droplets behind like breadcrumbs. The nobles whispered louder now. "Who is she? She's dripping on the tiles. That's definitely mud. Look at the floors." But the prince paid no attention to any of it. He took her hand. She took a breath. The violins resumed, tentatively at first, then stronger as the rhythm returned. The pair began to turn slowly, Elira trying not to slip on the polished marble, her boots giving the occasional squish or squeak that echoed through the chamber like a joke that only she and the prince found funny. And still the crowd watched. Elira wasn't graceful. Her steps were small and unsure. She accidentally stepped on the prince's toe. "Oops," she whispered. He grinned. "Best dance I've had all night." She laughed. And that's when something odd began to happen. Behind her, just where her boot had landed, a tiny bud peeked up from the floor. Daisy. She didn't notice. Neither did the prince. But one of the nobles gasped and pointed. Look! More flowers were blooming. From each muddy print, a new blossom unfurled. Daisies, tulips, and violets trailing where she danced. Elira blinked mid-twirl. She looked down. The marble was turning into a garden. Elira stumbled to a stop, staring at the floor beneath her feet. A ring of fresh flowers, daisies, forget-me-nots, tiny wild roses, had bloomed in perfect spirals where her boots had touched. They weren't painted. They weren't embroidered. They were real. The prince followed her gaze. "Well," he said with a slow, amazed smile, "that's new." Guests began murmuring louder now, but the tone had changed. No longer scornful, just stunned. Eyes widened. Fans lowered. Children peeked from behind embroidered skirts. The floor, once polished and cold, was softening into color. Her footprints formed a trail of petals and stems, little vines curling across the marble as if they'd always belonged there. A violet bloomed right under the hem of her raincoat. Elira looked at the prince. "Am I doing this?" He gave a small, enchanted laugh. "It certainly wasn't me. I only bring muddy footprints, not miracles." She glanced at her boots. Still muddy, still squeaky, but glowing now, just a little, where the flower prints appeared. A servant near the wall dropped a tray of glasses. No one noticed. The queen's fan stopped entirely. And Elira, soaked, flustered, and suddenly full of impossible questions, did the only thing she could think of. She danced, this time with joy. She spun once, and a ring of tulips bloomed outward like a ripple. She stomped softly, and crocuses peeked up in pairs. Every turn she took left behind a memory in petals. And the ballroom, once stiff and silent, began to sway with her. The prince twirled her again, eyes alight, as if this was exactly the kind of wonder he'd been hoping would crash his party. Elira was smiling now, wide and wild. The girl in rain boots was blooming beneath the chandelier, and no one could take their eyes off her. From her high balcony, the queen watched with an unreadable expression. Her crystal fan remained frozen at her chin, but her icy blue eyes were locked on the girl in the center of the room, the girl in the muddy boots who danced like she didn't care who watched, and whose every footstep wove a miracle of color across the floor. For a long while she said nothing. Then, very slowly, she lowered the fan. A gasp rippled through the room. Courtiers leaned in to whisper, "She's watching." And Her Majesty never lowers her fan. Below, the music swelled. Elira was too busy laughing to notice. The prince had tried to mimic her little stomp, and instead slipped, nearly landing in a patch of wild violets. She grabbed his sleeve just in time, both of them giggling now as they steadied. And still the garden spread. The walls began to shimmer, shifting from cold stone to soft vines. Ivy unfurled along the columns. Lanterns that had once hung still and stately now swayed gently, their lights flickering into warm dandelion yellow glows. It was as though the palace itself had started to dream. Elira finally slowed her spin and looked up at the queen. Their eyes met for a moment across the vast hall. Elira curtsied, little awkward, little muddy, completely sincere. And to the astonishment of everyone present, the queen nodded. It wasn't a grand, sweeping bow. It wasn't a smile, but it was something. The kind of something that meant, "I see you." Elira's heart felt like a sunrise. She might not have had a gown or glass slippers, but she had wonder in her boots and magic in her steps. And somehow that had been enough to move a queen. The ballroom, once pristine and proper, was no longer made of marble and manners. It had transformed into something entirely different. Vines curled around columns like ribbon. Lanterns hovered like fireflies above guests' heads. Wherever Elira had danced, clusters of flowers had bloomed. Lilacs, buttercups, snapdragons, even small mushrooms popping up near the punch bowl. Children giggled and tiptoed through the trails she left. Grown-ups stared, first confused, then charmed, then quietly delighted. A duchess in layers of velvet reached down and picked a daisy. "It's real," she whispered to no one. Elira and the prince continued dancing, slowly now, taking in the beauty that unfolded with every step. "Have you done this before?" he asked, as a garland of pink blossoms curled around a chair behind them. "Not even once," she replied, half laughing, half in awe. He looked at her boots. "They're enchanted. They're muddy." "Same thing," he said. They turned again, and as they moved, so did the palace. The walls dissolved into trellises woven with morning glories. The ceiling softened into drifting clouds and starlight. Somewhere in the corner, a harpist abandoned her seat to spin barefoot among a swirl of golden leaves. And the music played on, warmer, wilder, dreamier. Elira glanced at her boots, which now shimmered faintly with each step. Not golden, not glass, but hers, completely hers. "You've changed the entire ballroom," the prince said. She looked around, eyes wide. "No," she said softly. We did." And just then, a soft patter sounded across the enchanted floor. Guests turned their faces upward. It was raining, indoors, but not a storm, not loud or cold. It was warm and soft and smelled like honeysuckle, and no one reached for umbrellas. They simply looked up and began to smile. The rain that fell inside the ballroom was unlike any other. It drifted down like the gentlest confetti, each drop glimmering, warm and sweet-smelling. It kissed cheeks, slid through curls, and made the chandelier sparkle twice as bright. At first, the guests stood frozen, unsure of how to respond to a drizzle coming from no ceiling at all. But as the scent of lavender and fresh earth filled the air, something shifted. A young countess laughed. A viscount sneezed dramatically and then burst into giggles. Even the queen blinked in surprise as a raindrop landed squarely on her fan. Elira tilted her face upward, letting the rain soak her cheeks, her eyebrows, her tangled braid. She closed her eyes. Didn't feel like water. Felt like welcome. The prince joined her, stretching out both arms as if to catch stars. "This," he said, spinning once, "is definitely not what my mother had in mind for the royal ball." Elira grinned. "Do you think she's mad?" He looked up at the queen, still watching, still expressionless, and said, "I think she's curious." Around them, the noble guests slowly began to shed their stiff postures. Gloves were peeled off. Shoes were slipped away. Hairpins came loose as a few of the younger ones dared to step into the puddles that were now forming in elegant little rings. One of the lords gave a cautious twirl. Another dipped a toe into a patch of petal-covered rainwater. Laughter bubbled up. Real laughter, not the careful kind saved for toasts. Elira looked around in wonder. She hadn't meant to cause any of this. But maybe, just maybe, it was meant to happen through her. Rain boots and all. And suddenly, she didn't feel out of place anymore. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The ballroom had become a forest of joy. The nobles, once so polished and poised, now danced barefoot through puddles, their hems soaked and their laughter echoing beneath the glowing lanterns. Flowers bloomed beneath their feet, as if responding to the mood itself, growing faster with every giggle, every carefree spin. Elira twirled near a fountain that hadn't been there 10 minutes before. Water sang as it splashed down into a pool of lily pads that had appeared like magic, or maybe had always been waiting. She passed the Duchess again, now shoeless, her ornate hairstyle fallen into soft curls, as she gently cradled a bouquet of lilies in her arms. "My dear," the Duchess said, "do your boots work in the conservatory too?" Elira shrugged with a smile. "I think they just like music." "Don't we all?" the woman murmured, smiling back. Near the orchestra, musicians were playing freely now, improvising melodies that sounded like spring mornings. The violinist had removed his jacket and danced between phrases. The harpist was barefoot. A trumpet player leaned on one foot, toes tapping in rhythm against damp stone that once gleamed like glass. The queen still watched from above. A single raindrop landed on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Instead, she whispered something to a nearby attendant, who nodded quickly and vanished. Moments later, a second set of grand doors opened, wide and welcoming. They led to the royal garden. But the garden was no longer outside. It had crept in. Or perhaps the palace had bloomed out. Vines curled around the entryway. Night-blooming jasmine opened with a sigh. And one by one, the guests, muddy, happy, and changed, walked through into a world that felt more real than marble ever had. Elira followed, her boots blooming with every step. The garden beyond the ballroom wasn't quite as anyone remembered it. Where once had been hedges trimmed into the shapes of lions and lampposts stood now soft meadows, with grass that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The paths were lined not with stone but with petals, and the fountains bubbled with laughter-like ripples. Lanterns floated between the trees, shaped like glowing seeds drifting gently on the breeze. Fireflies danced through the air, their light pulsing in rhythm with the music that still drifted faintly from inside. Elira stepped through the threshold, her boots trailing blossoms that rooted themselves into the soil as if they had always belonged. Behind her, the prince followed, his formal jacket flung over one shoulder, a vine now looped around his wrist like a bracelet offered by the evening itself. Guests emerged one by one. Some paused to inhale the scent of night lilies. Others tiptoed into the grass, letting the dew chill their toes. No one complained. No one hurried. It was as if the entire palace had sighed in relief, finally free to breathe. A small boy in velvet knelt to touch a flower Elira's boots had left behind. "They're warm," he whispered. "Like candle petals." She smiled. The queen stepped forward too, regal and slow, her gown barely brushing the grass. But even she didn't resist when a single petal landed on her shoulder and clung there like a badge. The night had changed something. Not just the room, not just the people, but the way they moved, the way they saw. A royal ball was supposed to be gowns and curtsies and rules. Instead, it had become a garden of laughter, of rain, of barefoot nobility. And in the center of it all was a girl in muddy yellow boots, quietly glowing. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the garden-turned ballroom. The rain had faded, leaving dew-kissed petals and the sweet hush that only follows joy. The air felt thick with wonder, like everyone had accidentally walked into a dream and politely agreed not to question it. Elira stood near a patch of clover, watching nobles twirl through the grass. Her boots, no longer squeaking, shimmered faintly with every step. Wherever she walked, small blossoms sprouted behind her, gentle trails of daisies, violets, even a bluebell or two that rang softly when brushed. The prince joined her again, cheeks flushed from dancing with 3 duchesses, 2 counts, and a mischievous girl who had somehow tied ivy into his hair without him noticing. "You've completely stolen the evening," he told Elira, brushing a petal from his shoulder. "I didn't mean to," she said, slightly embarrassed. "I know," he said, smiling. "That's why it worked." They stood together, watching as lanterns floated above the heads of children chasing after glowing bugs. Somewhere in the garden, a tree had bloomed out of season, its branches heavy with silver fruit that no one dared to pick, but everyone admired. "It feels," Elira whispered, "like the whole world sighed and turned soft." The prince nodded. "We needed that." From inside the palace, a clock began to chime. Not the booming clang of midnight in stories, but a gentle peal like wind through glass. Elira looked up. "Midnight?" "No," said the prince. "Just a very polite 11. They shared a quiet laugh. Raindrops sparkled on leaves. Grass shimmered with starlight. The queen sipped something floral from a crystal cup and didn't look displeased. And in this not quite ordinary moment, Elira felt it fully. Not just that she had come to the royal ball, but that she had changed it. As the soft chime of 11 faded into the night air, the garden quieted. Not silent, just slower. The music softened to a lullaby tempo, the kind that makes you sway without knowing, the kind that settles into your bones like the warmest blanket. Elira stepped lightly through the grass, letting her boots guide her. They were glowing more now. Not bright, not showy, just warm and golden around the soles, like fireflies had taken up residence beneath her heels. A little girl in a frilly dress tugged at her sleeve. "Excuse me," she said in the shyest voice. "Can I borrow your boots after you're done with them?" Elira crouched, smiling. "They might be too muddy." "I don't mind. I like mud," the girl declared proudly, holding up her own scuffed shoes. "Well," Elira said thoughtfully, "maybe one day they'll find you." She tapped the girl's nose with a fingertip, and to everyone's quiet amazement, a tiny sunflower bloomed at her feet. The girl squealed and ran off shouting, "I got one! I got a flower!" Elira rose, heart full. The prince found her again, offering a petal-filled teacup with a sheepish grin. "They've started making drinks out of your footprints." She took it. "Tastes like rain and apricots." "I wouldn't know," he replied. "I stepped in a mushroom patch." All around, laughter softened into calm conversation. Guests sat on mossy stones and flower benches that hadn't existed hours ago. Some dipped toes in crystal puddles. Others closed their eyes and leaned against trees that hummed softly when touched. The ball wasn't ending. It was simply exhaling. No trumpets, no grand farewells. Just a stretch, a sigh, a glow. And at the heart of it all, one quiet girl with rain in her hair and wildflowers in her wake. The last dance began not with an announcement, but with a gentle pull. Music like moonlight drifting through trees, slow and sweet and meant only for those who were still listening. The prince extended his hand to Elira once more. "One more?" he asked, not like a royal making an offer, but like a friend hoping she'd say yes. She did. They stepped back onto the flower-laced path together, her boots padding quietly on the soft ground. Around them, the garden rustled with sleepy joy, lanterns swaying like sleepy stars, petals curling into rest. As they danced, petals floated from the air. Some brushed her cheeks, others tangled in the prince's hair. Neither minded. Elira laughed softly as she spun, her coat swirling around her knees, droplets of rain flicking into sparkles in the air. Her boots left tiny bursts of light now, flowers that pulsed once and glowed like tiny stars before fading into the grass. The prince held her gently, careful not to step on any new blooms. "You know," he said quietly, "they'll talk about this ball for 100 years. Elira gave a small smile. "Will they remember the girl with the rain boots?" He tilted his head. "They'll remember how she made the palace bloom." She blinked, heart fluttering. "Besides," he added, "those boots might be the most important pair of shoes this palace has ever seen." As the music slowed, they drifted to a stop beneath a flowering arch. Lantern light pooled around them. They stood there for a breath, just the two of them, in the middle of a garden that hadn't existed hours ago. Elira looked down at her boots. Still muddy, still hers. She stepped back with a quiet nod. It was time. And without a word, she turned to go. Elira didn't wait for applause. She didn't bow. She didn't even glance back at the ballroom that had become a forest of lights and petals. She simply walked down the garden path, past nobles resting on mossy stones and children asleep under flower canopies. She stepped softly, her boots leaving a final trail of glowing blooms in the grass. The hush of the evening wrapped around her like a shawl, and the music faded behind her like the tail end of a dream. No one stopped her. Not the prince. Not the queen. Not even the guards who now smiled quietly from the garden gates, their once starched uniforms flecked with lilac petals. Elira reached the edge of the palace grounds, where the polished stones turned back into mud and forest floor. The magic began to dim, not fade, just soften, as if it had decided to stay behind and continue blooming in the hearts of those still inside. She looked down at her boots. Still muddy, but not just muddy anymore. They sparkled faintly, like they remembered something they'd never known before. She tugged up her hood, now dry and wrinkled, and gave one last glance over her shoulder. The palace stood silent behind her, but not asleep. Lanterns still flickered in the trees. A daisy waved gently in the breeze. She smiled, then turned away. Her walk home was quiet. The wind whispered through the trees, and the clouds above parted just enough to let the stars blink through. One by one, her footsteps left behind tiny lights, blooms that glowed softly and vanished after she passed. She didn't need a carriage or glass slippers. She had wonder in her step and a story that would live longer than the mud on her boots. The forest welcomed her back like an old friend. Branches arched overhead, forming a sleepy tunnel of silver leaves and moonbeam shadows. The path was soft beneath her boots, each step leaving behind a fading blush of flowers, gentle glowing reminders that something magical had passed this way. Elira walked slowly now. The adrenaline had ebbed, replaced by a warm, dreamy quiet inside her chest. She wasn't tired, not really, but her heart was full in that way that makes you want to hold every moment still. She didn't need to rush. The world felt different, not louder or brighter, just kinder, as if the palace had loaned a little of its wonder to the night, and the night had chosen her to carry it home. Crickets sang in the distance. Owls blinked from treetop perches. And somewhere far behind, music still hummed through the leaves, soft and fading, like a lullaby someone sings after the last candle's been blown out. Elira's cottage came into view, its crooked chimney puffing gently into the sky. A single lantern flickered in the window, left just in case. She stepped through the door, boots squeaking faintly on the wooden floor, and set them by the hearth. They glowed once more, one final bloom, and then settled, quiet as sleep. She slipped out of her coat, her dress still scented faintly of rain and jasmine, and curled into bed beneath her patchwork quilt. Outside, the flower trail she'd left through the forest shimmered gently for a moment more, then faded into the earth. But somewhere, in a palace that would never forget her, the queen kept a single daisy pressed inside a royal book. And the prince? He dreamed of muddy boots and laughter in the rain. So now, little dreamers, the ball is over. The music has quieted. The flowers have all curled into sleep, and the boots, those bold, squeaky boots, rest by the fire, just a little wiser than before. Maybe you're still picturing the garden lit by lanterns, or the way the rain fell so gently indoors it felt like a secret being told to the petals. Maybe you can feel the soft glow under your feet too, like magic left behind by someone who never needed glass slippers to begin with. What does wonder look like to you? Is it muddy and golden like Elira's boots? Is it quiet and blooming like her footsteps? Or maybe it's simply the way a night can change everything. If you're brave enough to believe, let those thoughts drift through your dreams now, gentle and slow, like vines growing in moonlight. Let them curl softly around your breath and carry you somewhere safe and lovely. You've had your own kind of adventure tonight, haven't you? Close your eyes. Feel the hush settle. The rain has stopped. The petals are still. The world is blooming in silence. And it's waiting for you to rest. Sweet dreams, traveler of wonder.